Welcome to Bite Size PL, professional learning you can consume during lunch, or on a dog walk, or while you wait for your sculpture to fire. Our goal is to provide meaningful, engaging, and brief conversations for educators. I'm Jared, and my co-host today is Kate.
Hey, Jared.
And our guest today is the art teacher extraordinaire, Mike Call.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, you are welcoming us into your class, and we got to be here earlier today, and it was great to see all the exciting, really fun work that you're doing in here. One just quick observation is we came in and just all the kids were just engaged, and they're just all working away.
When you get to play with clay, it's kind of an engaging thing.
Super fun.
Yeah, well, there you go.
They tend to love that.
So I want to start by talking about an experience that happened to me when I was like 13 or 14. My mom had signed me up for an art class, and I went. I'm pretty sure my brother was there, and then some kids in the neighborhood. And we would go to this art class, and the teacher had this model, like or a drawing that we would kind of base ours off of. And then we get to this point where the teacher would come around and pretty much remove us out of the spot of being in charge of say it's painting. And then she would finish everyone's, and they all would look the same. And I just remember, like, I just didn't feel like I had ownership in that moment. And I felt that this was her work and not my own. And so coming into your class today, like, the thing that was very obvious was that everyone there was working on their piece, like it was theirs. They had total ownership over it. And in the process of feedback, like, they were eager to hear what was said so that they could work on their piece.
Yeah, that's kind of funny that you had that memory. I have a similar memory that I talk about with my kids right at the beginning, like first day of school. But my first experience that I remember with clay was in kindergarten, and they had an artist come in, and she was teaching us how to make pinch pots. You take a ball of clay and you pinch, and you want it nice and even and a beautiful shape. And I'm sitting there and I'm following the instructions, and I look over, and my best friend's sitting there, and he's sculpting a dinosaur. Like little brontosaurus, long tail, neck. And I'm thinking, oh, he's going to get in so much trouble. He's not following the instructions. And then the artist came over and just loved it. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And at the end of the day, I got to take home my pinch pot, and my friend got to take home a dinosaur. And so I always tell my students first day of class, if you want a dinosaur, you got to make a dinosaur. And we're teaching you principles and concepts, but you do need to make it your own. And we do prioritize that. So.
Oh yeah. Well, that's fantastic. That's the whole culture of learning that you've created here in your class.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I even saw when we observed your class, you were working on lips, everyone's sculpting lips. And one of your students had sculpted like an open mouth with a tongue coming out. And you were like, looks like we had some fun here. And I was like, because I was thinking the same thing in my, I have the whole like deference to authority, or am I doing it the right way, which is why I'll never be an artist. But it was great. You made something a little different.
So you've got this culture in your class where you have engagement and you have empowerment. And I just think that's so powerful to have this culture of learning. And there's this other piece that goes with it that allows the students to be vulnerable because they're sharing their work and they're getting feedback on it. What have you done to cultivate the culture of learning and ultimately this vulnerability in your students?
I think to have a successful art classroom, you have to have that. And so just me believing in the importance of it, I have a lot of experience. I was an artist before I became a teacher. I'm a fairly new teacher, but as an artist, getting feedback is essential to be successful. And so you have a community of artists where you have people come look at and give you a critique. And I believe it's important. And I try to model that vulnerability for my students. Like I show them artwork I'm working on right now, and I show them artwork from a year ago, and I'm growing. I'm a completely different artist a year than I was a year ago. And so I think modeling that a little bit, and we really tend to focus on the positive. So when the students are looking for what to critique, we're looking for who's succeeding and why are they succeeding and how can I make that mine too.
I kind of want to hone in on what we observed today, which was you having a table of students.
So last group's table 6 and table 1, if you'll bring yours over.
Bring up these lips that they were working on sculpting.
So guys, for this critique, we're going over 3 different principles that we presented when we were beginning, right?
You were asking them to provide feedback on these 3 things that you had taught them, and essentially who's doing this really well.
And so you've got a little piece of paper. You're going to come up, take a couple minutes, and kind of look through them, but you're going to pick one that you think really captures the toast rule.
Peer feedback can be potentially very scary. Like, oh, my peers are looking at this, not just like a teacher or, And so I wonder if there's something that you do to prep them to receive that kind of feedback as well.
Feedback for an artist or criticism in an art classroom has kind of a different connotation than like if you're being critical of a friend or I don't know, like in a social situation, there's a difference. And we talk early on, and especially we've now had 3 critiques. And so we've been kind of building capacity in the students and how to engage. But anyway, with art criticism, there's 4 levels. You start off simply with descriptions and describing what you're seeing and just looking. Like it's about developing observation and what's there. And then you get into some analyzing what principles and elements of art are being used and how's that working. And then you interpret it. What does this mean? And what does this mean to me? And then the 4th step is where we get to judgment. And even then, when we're judging a piece, it's more how successful is it, not is it good or bad? Because you always get a kid that wants to come up, is it good? Is it bad? And that's not what we're talking about. It's what it is. And there's things that are working, and there's always something that could be better. And let's just keep growing. Maybe a little bit more rounder on that one, Brockton. Okay. Whose is this one? Yeah, nice job, Kate. What I like about this one, I model a lot of how I do my class on one of my great professors from college named Leon Parson that had these critiques. And you learn so much from the other people in your class and hearing that criticism. So I try to keep small groups, but even students who aren't prepared, and there was a few students today who are just behind and not having it there, but still coming and looking at what everyone else is doing is helping them grow.
Yeah. So in the spirit of noticing, one of the things that I noticed that you did was to model accepting feedback.
These critiques are good for me too, because the one thing that I'm noticing is all of my kind of keys for this assignment focused on just the lips. And so a lot of them when I'm looking at, and actually, whose is this one? Mine. So this one and this one, you guys have both done a great job kind of going beyond and getting some of these forms that are around the lips. And I've got to figure out how I'm going to teach that a little better, just because it's not just the lips. The mouth is the skin around it, the little folds, the little bulges.
Why is it important for you to discuss your own feedback loop in front of the students?
Again, it's part of modeling that vulnerability. And again, as a teacher, I'm a completely different teacher than I was last year too. And one thing that's different this year, I tried to do whole class critiques, and it was less engaging. The students, it was way easier for them to get on their phone and not be there. So having them get up and come over and kind of huddle up, that improved the quality of what kids got out of it. But I have a story where, and I show them a statue that I was working on for the Boy Scouts of a guy telling a campfire story. And when I was alone, and I know an artist that lives here in Utah that does NFL portraits for the Hall of Fame, like a really great artist named Blair Buswell. And I called him one day, and he actually spent a whole afternoon tearing my piece apart, but helping me learn principles. And there's so much value in getting feedback from people who know what they're talking about.
Well, it's powerful to have the instructor and somebody that they know is a successful artist. And, you have pieces in the room that they can see, like if you were a writer, we'd say you're a published author. And then to see how you were willing to take feedback from your students even, and how that informs the instruction that you provide to them. Like, that's powerful for them to see.
And I even occasionally bring in my own work and include it in critiques, especially with my AP kids, and find and actually last year, about this time, I was doing a project on the side for the National Guard, and I had a soldier, and there was just something, it just was kind of blah. It just didn't have it. And one of my students was like, well, he's not looking through his, like, he's kind of walking with his gun, but the second he said, pull it up, and we just did it right there. I grabbed it, cranked that arm up, and all of a sudden it had the intensity and the power. And so I don't know, but they have valuable things to offer.
It's great to see that seep into even you getting that feedback and saying, oh, as a teacher, I need to change the rubric a little bit so we're focusing on things around the mouth and not just the lips themselves, because that's going to contribute to this. And you're even applying on the spot, like, oh, that's something I need to do, and I'm going to take this. I'm getting this feedback from looking at your work, and it's something we need to include in future things. It's just it's a powerful thing to watch that artistic principle of criticism being applied in something else more broadly, which I think is just a life skill.
And those patterns start to emerge when you see that work.
I heard you say a quote.
There's a saying in art that same is boring, boring, boring.
How do you encourage students to apply the artistic principles that you're trying to teach them, those basic fundamentals, while still adding their own artistic flair?
In art, pretty much no matter what art you teach, you have the elements of art, which are the things that art's made of, and then you have principles. And same is boring, boring, boring is a way that one of my teachers taught the principle of variation. Like, no one wants to look at a boring piece of art. And so if it's boring, what can you do to make it more interesting? And it's a principle, right? And then, but the more that these kids understand how different visual principles function, that gives them a voice, that you're helping them to understand the language of art so that they can say what they want to say. And so if that one student wants to say something a little different with a vampire mouth instead of just a regular mouth, or I had a kid do Shrek ears instead of ears, right? But they're still the principles that I try to teach are there, but being used in a different way. Being flexible with that and giving kids space to take risks. And it gives them a chance to maybe screw up a little bit or say, that doesn't work, I don't like that. And then when they get maybe a more finished piece that isn't just an ear study, they've got a little bit of experience in their belt of more options they can use to complete a project.
One of the themes that is coming from our conversation is, in the process of art, you have to have like a growth mindset to really be successful. And with your students, how are you helping them have that growth mindset and be able to take the feedback that they're getting and then actually apply it into their work?
A couple of things come to my mind. I always talk about how in order to be an artist, you have to be courageous. And so you probably saw me like take a tool and just like mangle somebody's statue, and really you got to kind of push it that way, right? But you have to trust that if you did it once, you can do it better the next time. And so I think what kind of captures that, I always tell them, we're not making art as much as we're making artists, right? And so at the end of the day, if you screw up a piece, you still learn from that, and you're still meeting the goals of the class. You're still becoming an artist. You just have there are a couple failures they're leading you that way. And so being courageous, taking risks, I try to encourage that in my kids, because that's where the growth happens. That's when they make giant leaps.
Well, and explicitly teaching that, and then explicitly structuring, like we saw today, after they went through this criticism exercise with their peers, you asked them to analyze it for themselves.
So just out of curiosity, out of all of these things, what's been the hardest?
Well, what was hardest for you? What's been the easiest? Think back. Where can you go from here? How are you? And really like structuring that application, I think, is really powerful for them.
Grab that Post-it note, and then you're going to write what you think you did your strongest, what you did the best so far, and then what you need to maybe fix. And then you're going to give me those, just put it in the bowl when you've got that filled out, okay?
Yeah, you have it like literally baked into what you're doing, that self-reflection, where they're really thinking about the piece. I had the opportunity to talk to a couple students and just ask them, like, with this process, like, how does this help you? And they were both like, oh, this is immensely helpful, because I get to see everyone else's work, and they all have valuable parts to each person's work, even if mine looks a little bit different, but then I can take from that and just apply the piece that I'm working on and add it into my work.
Yeah, and that comes a lot again from that teacher I was talking about at Leon Parson. But I had the opportunity to be in a class with a kid who now is an art director at Pixar, and was always like heads and tails above everybody else in the class, just amazing. But I would learn as much from watching my teacher critique his work as I would from having him critique mine. But I could take what I learned and the principles of art that were being discussed, and then I could apply them to my drawing next.
Really, you are encouraging and teaching your young artists to be noticers, right? So how do you cultivate that in them where they should be noticers? Because I think that can apply across contents, right? We want our scientists to be noticers about phenomenons around them. We want our readers to be appreciative of great prose, and how are you fostering that in a way for your students?
So like lesson number 1 in really any art class that I teach, for me, art takes place in your body in 4 different places. It takes place in your hands, right? You're manipulating a pencil or clay. It takes place in your eyes. You observe things. It takes place in your mind. You draw and you sculpt what you understand, what you know, and then it takes place in your heart. And that's when it takes on more meaning, that emotional side of it, right? And so art, you're always going through those 4 things. Is you talk about, I'm not an artist. Well, what could we work on? Is it a coordination thing? Do we need to work on some coordination, some skills with your hands? Is it learning to understand what you see, and what you see and what you know kind of fight as an artist? I don't know if you thought about that, but sometimes like I have kids draw a glass of water, and they know that the top of the glass is round because you have to pour water in, and they know the bottom of the glass is flat because it has to sit on the table. And so they draw a round top and a flat bottom. But in reality, the way ellipses work in perspective is if you hold a paper plate right at eye level, it looks flat. And as you lower it, it gets rounder and rounder and rounder. But we draw what we know, not what we see. And so learning to understand what you see versus what you know, and what you know can help. And anyway, but we talk about those different things, and I try to be explicit when we're learning, which skill is this? So with the lips, we're talking about knowing some things with anatomy, but looking for certain shapes on things, or you know what I mean? And then ultimately, all the other things get thrown out, because what really matters is how you respond to a work of art and how it fits your heart, right? And that's where that vampire tooth came in, right? Like it's something that she felt strongly about, and so we're using these other tools to get into that side of it.
I think this is something, again, that can be applied cross-content, of explicitly teaching those skills that are going to make you a more successful in that field. That's not necessarily, right? It's not necessarily the principles of art, but noticing, and like you said, where art takes place and how we critique all of these skills, all of these professional skills, 21st century learner skills, soft skills, whatever you want to call them, that make them successful. I think sometimes we forget that explicitly teaching those and embedding them in our lessons, that's what helps students become successful with their work. So this has just been a delight. We just really appreciate coming to see your class and getting to see your talented students and watching them with this really cool feedback cycle. We always like to end our episode with a gift or a recommendation or something that's making you happy right now. Do you have a gift for our listeners?
I do. If you haven't checked out The Great Pottery Throwdown, it's a British TV show. It's kind of like The Great British Baking Show, but with pots.
Okay.
Awesome show.
All right. Does it have that same like really happy feel?
It does have a good vibe.
Okay.
It does have a good vibe.
There's something about British game shows that just have really.
It's not the mean competitive like the American shows.
They're like
everybody's kind of supporting,
helping, and okay. I'll have to check that out. Where is it streaming somewhere?
It's streaming on HBO. I know.
Okay. Thank you.
I think we've gotten a few gifts today. I think just the conversation we were able to have with you, Mike, and your quote where you said that we're creating artists. Like, I think that's another one that can go into any subject matter. Like, we're creating writers in English, we're creating scientists in science. And just thanks so much for the conversation that we had with you. And we'd also like to thank our producer, Tom, for making us sound so good. And we'd like to thank all of our listeners for listening and invite you to subscribe if you haven't yet and to share the podcast with others. See you at school.